So I want to welcome to the stage Tiffany Allecia, who has her Master's of Education and is the Executive Director of the Springfield Creative City Collective. She is a dynamic community organizer, activist, and advocate for systemic change. Raised in Springfield, she credits community mentorship for inspiring her life of service. Tiffany's work focuses on addressing systemic racism, economic inequity, and fostering social and emotional healing. She manages bipolar II disorder, agoraphobia, general anxiety disorder, and depression while leading initiatives combating discrimination and the educational opportunity gap. Tiffany bridges policy advocacy, creative entrepreneurship, and social change, envisioning Springfield as a global arts and cultural capital. She will deliver the closing keynote at today's summit, sharing insights on building creative power from local to state levels. Her keynote session will empower our creative leaders to take bold, actionable steps towards strengthening their communities and advancing creative economies across the region. I want you guys to give a warm welcome to our keynote speaker this evening, Tiffany Allecia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me know if the mic is.
Hello. There we go. Hey, everybody. Oh, man, I'm super high up here. Hi, everybody. My name is Tiffany Allecia, and I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director of the Springfield Creative City Collective. Thank you. And I am so happy to be here. So when I give a speech, I always like to tell the crowd like what I was told to speak on, so we all have like a shared like kind of understanding. So I'm asked to talk today about my perspective on building power through collective action, transforming grassroots momentum into institutional change, creating pathways for underrepresented voices, connecting local initiatives to statewide impact, and moving from inspiration to concrete action. So no biggie, right? Just a strategy to save the world, right? We can figure this out. Okay, so that being said, I am a creative myself, and in everything I do, I like to bring creative energy. I've come to realize, though, that I have a couple of kind of like ground principles and ideas that flows through a lot of the work that I do. And I found it now meaningful to talk about some of those ideas before I get into the nitty-gritty. Is that okay with you guys? Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna be up here for about 20 minutes. I have my 3 perfect children over there. So if you see me momming off to the side, that it's okay, it's normal. And then we're gonna get into your questions. So I should be up here for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take questions after that. Okay. That being said, I want to start with these kind of major principles that I operate from that really impacts my decision-making and how we build a stronger, more sustainable creative economy. First things first, I practice self-awareness so much. So much, it's kind of like at the core of what I do. Usually when you hear self-awareness, people want you to critique yourself and identify all the things you got going on that you need to change and grow. And that's super important, right? But there's this other kind of more abstract self-awareness that keeps me grounded. Can I tell you about it? All right. So first things first is we all live on a floating rock that waits every day for a burning floating rock to circulate and orbit around us so we can stay alive. That's just one thought I think about constantly, right? Another thought that I think about is the Big Bang. We're not arguing how the world started, but scientifically with the Big Bang, I found out that when it happened, there was 3 major elements that came out of it: hydrogen, oxygen, and I believe nitrogen, right? That's what came out of the Big Bang. That's what scientists says. Does anyone know like the other element that we all really need to exist that begins with the C? We're kind of working on our footprint. Carbon. So if these 3 elements that came out of the Big Bang, where did the carbon come from? Scientists say that all the carbon that we have access to in the universe actually comes from exploding stars, and it's the byproduct of it. So to wrap my head around that we're all carbon beings, and we came out of this Big Bang evolutional theory, and the thing that we literally need to survive came from exploding stars. All that mixed together means to me that I can be as delusional as I want to be. Our reality is absolutely insane. So there's no limit to what's possible if we're literally all made up of exploding stars. Can you process that with me? And so when you add on to the fact that to live today, and this is an outdated statistic, but to live today, there's a probability, I think that's what it's called, the statistic of how likely it is for all of us to be alive as individuals. And it's kind of insane to me. So not only do each and every one of us have at least 16 generations of DNA that can be accessed if you're studied in your DNA right now, so we're living with 16 generations of ourselves and our ancestry. On top of that, for you to be alive in this century and exist through all the perils that went through human evolution, each and every one of us is 1 in 14 trillion. 1 in 14 trillion. I can't even process $1 million. I can definitely not process $1 trillion. And to think that 8 billion people are all 1 in 14 trillion, I just needed y'all to understand this is the delusional level I'm at, and I think everyone is superstars, and it is a core element in what I do and how I work. Okay, next idea. Everything was an idea once. Everyone's a creative. If you're a scientist, if you are let me get out of science. List of careers in your head. My brain isn't working right now. But anything that anyone does is creative. Whether you're playing with math equations instead of a paintbrush, or you're digging holes instead of doing graphic design, you're still creating. When we shift our ideas from just being, oh, people who are producing some type of visual art is a creative, to every single person is a creative, we're able to holistically shift what we believe of value in each other. That being said, right alongside with that is we have to realize that we are creatives. It doesn't matter our titles, it doesn't matter if we're executives and administrators, but if we're self-aware that we're creative ourselves, we're a very selfish species, humans. We automatically start to believe that in other people. Okay, so the last 2 ideas before we get into the nitty-gritty is this. Strategy, design, implementation, and continuous professional development is a formula that will work every time. If you're putting the effort into strategically design what you're doing, having it being informed and equitable to the community you're serving, you're already 10 steps ahead. Then when it comes to implementation, you take that same model of valuing people, valuing identity and what they can bring, you're 20 steps ahead. And then that lastly, recognizing that we're lifelong learners, so you always have the opportunity to grow and learn more, takes us another step further. And then lastly, adaptability, psychology, and sociology. If you're at this level, if you're trying to engage in communities and create systemic change, then we're talking about behavior. We're talking about people shifting what they normally do to hopefully do something more positive and engaging. When you get into the realm of psychology and behavior, you cannot ignore all the different limitations and experiences we have as humans that impacts our decision making. When you're talking about people going to the parks, when you're talking about people showing up at events, you can't talk about it unless you're aware of where they are in Maslow's hierarchy. And I have to say, every time I bring up Maslow's hierarchies of needs, that is connected to indigenous populations that were studied. And so it's not his original idea, it's just the frame that we have. That being said, on the lowest level of his needs is shelter, food, housing, access to clean air, things of that nature. So many people are struggling with those things, and we're trying to tell them, oh, it will help if you go to the ballet. Oh, okay, I know that's an issue, but we got this funding, and if we don't get enough people at the community event, the funding goes away. We have to recognize continuously that the people we are trying to engage have other things going on. That's just the world we're living in. So those are my principles that I walk around with. Now let's jump into the nitty-gritty. So first things up, creating pathways for underrepresented voices. That's something that we all do on a regular basis, hopefully. But if we're not doing it, the way that it's easy to create spaces to do that is, one, get comfortable with discomfort. The conversations we have to have is not fun. In fact, anytime I say I work in dismantling systemic oppression, one of the things that I'm hyper aware of is it didn't happen in a day. It took centuries of ideas and implementation to get us to the point that we are at now. And some of the pains that got us to this reality is so uncomfortable to the point of volatile reactions. And somehow we're supposed to balance acknowledging these things and then oftentimes agreeing to disagree and then actively working. Because as the last panel said, we're all interconnected regardless. You can hate me if you want to. What I do, quite frankly, impacts you. What you do, what your family does, impacts me consistently. So figuring out how to get comfortable with being uncomfortable in the position that we are today. And it has nothing to do with us, we're just alive, right? So we're just alive, acknowledging, wow, all of that really stinks. How do we get rid of the smell? How do we get to the source? And how do we get it done? Now, obviously it's not that simple, but the point is, once we acknowledge that it's not gonna be all rainbows and sunshines, we start getting further ahead. One example I can give you of that is kind of how I got started. I created an organization almost 10 years ago called Real Recognize Fake. And I'm gonna give you a really short story. I am proudly divorced, but at the time, I was like a wreck, right? Absolutely broken down. And I remember swimming in the pool with one of my best friends, and I was just yapping, and I was telling him how the world isn't fair and all these different things. And I don't know if he was sick of me or tired, but he said the generic statement, real recognize real. And that just made me so mad. And I couldn't understand why until I started talking, and I was like, it's actually kind of easy to recognize when things are real. When you feel love, man, your heart rate's speeding up, you got the butterflies, you're smiling from ear to ear. When something tastes good, you're doing your little food dance, you know? It's kind of, there's a lot of other signals when something is real and authentically true. What's harder is recognizing when things are shifting, like when someone's falling out of love with you, or like when you're not passionate about what you once were, or when someone's lying to you. Right? So that's where the concept of Real Recognize Fake came in. And this was this platform and that started as community conversations where we'll talk about the hard things. It was a safe place where I admitted, I don't have solutions. I just know this is a problem. We're all dealing with these things. How do we get to the next step in potentially building a solution? No pressure. But if we were to fix this, how would we do it? And that was where we started. I think as executives, administrators, creative directors, and the list goes on, we're often telling people how to create change. But the sucky part about that and the ignorant part about that is that us in leadership can't create change on our own. It has to be implemented by usually the greater community. So when we're talking from the top down and not incorporating the original thoughts of those that we're serving, we're already setting up for whatever that program is to be either limited or, quite frankly, fail. And we see that over and over again. Anyone in the nonprofit world, arts and culture world has their favorite project that they thought was a complete waste of money, and they bring it up all the time, right? Okay, cool to criticize, but who was involved in making that happen? What does that project represent to other people? Waste is waste. But as we're figuring out how to do things differently, we need to understand that everyone's not always going to agree. Same thing as accessibility is different for everyone, so is what this world looks like when it's happy, healthy, and safe looks different for everyone. So as we're trying to incorporate underrepresented voices, we have to do so also hyper self-aware that we're not limited those voices. Because oftentimes I've also had experiences with community members where they felt like, I've showed up at these events, I've been to the programs, I've filled out the surveys, and their thoughts, their voices were not incorporated anyway. It was just a standard that we met for whoever our funders are. So I just want to put that out there. My phone just locked, so give me 1 second. But yeah, so moving on from including underrepresented voices. I gotta take off my glove. Oh, the scandal. 1 second. Okay, so there we go. I think you're too loud, boys. Please don't do that. Thank you. Okay, so moving on. As we're having these hard conversations, we're also going to be navigating, we're also going to be doing something simultaneously. If you're doing it in an authentic way and you're doing it in a way that isn't limiting, you're automatically going to start build some community trust. And when people build community trust, when people describe it, it's almost kind of like, what? Like, how do we even do that, right? But let's take the fantasy out of it. When we talk about trust, I'm going through a lot up here, 1 second. When we talk about trust, all we're talking about really is, it's giving your community the comfort that you're not going to be doing intentionally anything to harm them. That's the basis of trust. When you're talking about the work that your organization is doing, when you're talking about what you're seeking investment for, the community can trust that it's in a form of their best interest, right? And so to begin to build that, if you don't have it in that organization, is partially creating spaces that are accessible and you showing up in your most honest, authentic, and true way. And being able to navigate with emotional intelligence and all the restorative justice work models we have, these hard conversations that are gonna shift us to the next level. And then lastly, actually no, that was the last thing. Moving on to the second portion of this, which is moving from inspiration to concrete action. I'm hyper aware, like my favorite quote, and I think everyone should have a favorite quote, but mine is from Socrates, and it's, I know that I know nothing. And the reason why that's my favorite quote is because it is a level of humility for this essential genius that outlasted, like his knowledge has outlasted centuries, right? To come to an understanding that there's still so much to learn. So at all times, I'm at that point of I know that I know nothing. When you're talking about action, at this point of our reality, it has to be multifaceted. I love community moments. That's community trust right there. Okay, so it has to be, it can't operate on a silo. We're literally the last humans to get here. There's no reason why we can't be influenced by history. I truly believe history is our friend. And the solutions that we're creating doesn't necessarily have to be new. I'll give you a couple examples. And the reason why I put this under the category of from inspiration to action is because we do a lot of talking about what's wrong. I think there's ways to extract from history what went well, and try to build it in a way that's, less racist, less sexist, less misogynist, and all those kind of things. Two of my favorite examples to get inspiration from, and I'll be as quick as possible, but one is the Silk Road. Like, the Silk Road is one of my Roman empires because I just love it, right? So basically, the story goes, and I'm just paraphrasing, but ancient Rome somehow began to see this new fabric that they did not have, right? And so they had to figure out, where is this fabric coming from? Somehow, they find out that this fabric is coming from China. So they send soldiers and other people to China to get access to this fabric. Here's what China did. China was like, wow, we don't know who you are. You want access to our fabric. We'll give it to you, but we won't tell you how we make it. And I love that story because like intellectual property centuries ago is like kind of awesome and badass. I love that so much. But anyway, that's what happened. They protected their property, they protected their creation, and they made it into a commerce exchange. And that quite literally led to one of the most successful trade routes the world has ever seen, to the point where we still use it today. Yes, we use flight and other modes of transportation, but that same route of exchange is literally holding up countries' economies. That has so much creativity and ideation in it, and that should inspire us to look at Massachusetts, New England, the East Coast. Our country is, where are these Silk Roads that we're not seeing? Where are these goods that we're not exchanging? How can we create tangible infrastructure to do that, right? A month ago, we at the SCCC, had the honor of meeting the Western Mass Economic Development Council, going to their luncheon with one of the Counselor Generals from Canada. And she told us about how we have billions of dollars worth of economy, of trade going back from Massachusetts to Canada consistently, that was created based off of private businesses working together. Imagine if there was more strategic plans surrounding it. I say all that to say, the Silk Road, happening all the way back then, is still a beautiful model of how we can exchange today. Inspiration to action doesn't have to be, oh, I'm working so hard to figuring it out all on myself, or the people in this very room needs to make the solution. We're dealing with all of humanity we have access to right now. What's the thing that we don't know that's hindering us from getting to where we want to go? Okay, Dr. Seuss. All right, so the second example that I'll give before we move on in terms of inspiration to action, and the reason why I'm giving history as my big one, because we should already be inspired by the voices. That goes unsaid, right? If you're serving communities, your community's interpretations, your community's ideas, you should be inspired by them. I don't have to talk about that. The second one of history that really excites me is when we talk about the Netherlands, right? So again, things travel, people go from place to place, and at one point in history, the Netherlands got a hold of some spices. They had to figure out, where in the world did these spices come from? They taste amazing, how do we get more of it, right? So they plan out this voyage. They build this huge boat and plan out this voyage to go around Africa to get to India, right? Cool idea, kind of sounds insane, but they got people to do it. Now, they take this voyage. It takes 2 years to get there, right? 2 years to get there. And they come back with literally 2 bags of spices, like bags not bigger than this, of spices. 2 years to get this. And when they get back, they were expecting kind of disappointment. You just went on this voyage. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, as it equates to today, and you only came back with 2 bags of spices. This is a failure. Do you know how they were received instead? An absolute celebration. It was literally, you made it? You're still alive? Oh my goodness. You did it once. That means we can do again. This changed the decision-making of the Netherlands at the time, where they decided, we're gonna go all in on this, we're gonna use this route, we're gonna make fleets of ships, and we're gonna go get spices. And that happened, right? Fast forward 2 generations in, someone's working in the factory and just thinking their parents did this and they were doing this now. They realized that this wasn't the most efficient way of doing things. And so somehow, through action, this person thought of, what if we can use a circular motion and it translate into it chopping the wood? And he figured it out. That circular motion that they're doing, like spinning the wheel, ending up making their productivity 30 times higher in an hour than they had before, just because they invented this thing. Now, that invention turned them into dominating everything when it came to the seas. Why do I bring this up? Because going all the way back through that invention, through the decision to even get spices, and their success of coming back and bringing 2 bags, I kid you not, historians can connect those decisions to their capital and economic prowess, which would allow them to invest into New Netherlands. Does anyone know where the New Netherlands are? New York City, which we still are maximized today at one of the strongest economies in our world. If we can really process how our decisions now of engagement and intersection with what we're doing in our regions, whether it's North Central Mass, Western Mass, or the whole state, and realize how great of an impact it could be, you will never lose inspiration. You'll never lose motivation, because you realize that everything you do is like the biggest deal ever. You know? And you might be making pathways for generations to come. Okay, I know I only got like 5 minutes before questions, so I'm just gonna speed through this. In terms of, again, inspiring to action, the last thing that really helps me is defining levels of engagement. One of the tools that my mom gave me years ago is the concept of micro, meso, and macro. You hear me say it all the time if you're walking around with me. And the reason why, because it's important to recognize who's in the room, what they want, and what they want to give. Because it's not all about taking. Right? And so when you think about micro, these are the individual businesses, these are the individual artists, the individual creatives, the small scale organizations that most of them really just want to do the thing. They just want to do what they want to do. They're not interested in becoming advocates, they're not interested, they're wanting to do their thing, and oftentimes they're the most productive part of our creative economy consistently, right? That being said, when you move on to the next level, the meso, that's kind of like the in-between. That could be from your nonprofit organizations who are dedicated to creating some type of change for populations, to your regional entities, to your anchor institutions in a community that carries most of the jobs. These are like not small, but they're not the biggest, and they definitely don't have the most authority, right? And then lastly, you have your macro. These are the most powerful people. These are your funders. These are the people who are making the decisions that impact us all. Why is it important to level out these engagements? And it is because 2 things. It allows you to understand what's on the table. Most of these levels have different wants and different needs, and they're looking for you to solve them. When you can recognize that, okay, this networking event, we have different elements for the artists to attend, but we also realize that they're running businesses, so we're not gonna occupy 8 hours of their day. However, some of the executives that get paid to be at spaces like this, we're gonna make it for them, right? So it's like the concept of when we're planning and inspiring action, let's make sure the action itself isn't limiting to the party that we want to be involved. Okay? If we're trying to make a community event and we know that there's the audience that we want lacks in transportation, what are some of the things that we can do to help access transportation? And so inspiring to action isn't as much as, wow, I will follow you everywhere. That's an old model of exchange. It's recognizing people have needs, people have wants, and how can we meet them? Okay. The last thing I'm going to say about connecting local initiatives to statewide impact really falls within the table analogy. I know we hear it every single time that you go to anything these days. Some people say, always go get your seat at the table, make your spot there. Other people say, build your own table, people will come. Other people say that get rid of the table, I want to be outside. Like, the analogy has gone, right? But when I think about the table at this point, it's flawed to me because regardless of any table I've ever seen, even the biggest ones, with the amount of people that we need engaged to do this work, there's just never enough room. There's just not. The table analogy just does not work Because the fact that you have to fight and struggle to get a seat, the fact that you have to deal with the fact that people don't want you there, all these models of dismantling oppression in that way still embed something that I think we need to get away from, which is the concept of battling inferiority on a regular basis. How do we have the hard conversation that the tables that we're building automatically dictates that those who are not at it are inferior and don't deserve to be there, regardless if we feel that way or not? That's just where we are in history based off of what humanity has done to get this point. So when I think about engaging in statewide initiatives, I leave space to recognize that I may not be wanted there and sit with that. Radical acceptance of that. But then also recognize, what are the spaces that I want to hold to myself? Whether it's culture, whether it's womanhood, whether it's motherhood, I have to recognize the tables that I don't let people sit at, that I save for a very specific genre. Why would I bring this all up in this conversation? And it's because, especially with the heavy nature of DEIA right now, I feel like we've lost the plot a little, where we are expecting to erase pieces of ourselves for the sake of togetherness. And that was never the goal. The goal was always to accept people as they are, believe in them, and if you're in power, to make sure you're not doing anything to limit their success and their opportunities to grow. So I'm not going to tell you what to do with the table analogy, but as we continue to grow, let's think about the fact that maybe we're just a part of the world. And that's good enough. And we need to figure out how to be better in the world. But let's not force advocacy. Let's not force this life of having to do so much every single day, because I truly do believe that creative economic development has to come with personal inspiration and freedom to exist. We can't always be just changing everything. We have to start somewhere, and that's our art, that's our individuality that breathes life into these greater things. Okay, so speed, rapid fire. I'm so sorry, Derek. I just really want to get to this part. If you have to go, please go. I'm open for questions, or we can cut the questions, but I think these things are super important. Now that I got through all the categories that they wanted to talk to, I wanted to leave you guys with this, because I didn't want to be kind of ignorant to the fact that the world is literally on fire. Like, not figuratively, but like actually on fire. So as we're talking about these things, if it was, 2 months ago, I could have stopped my speech right there. I was like, okay, that's good enough. I gave them some nuggets, some quotable things, but I kind of want to just go a little bit deeper for a second. One of my other favorite concepts or quotes is actually from my professor at Howard, and I don't know where he got it from, but he says, never let a good crisis go to waste. And my dears, do we have a lot of good crises right now? And why would he say that? And it's because those who can self-regulate and operate with emotional intelligence and navigate high-stress scenarios know that crises are the time to plan. This is the time to look at what are the questions that's being asked right now, what are the issues that don't have solutions, and how can I voluntarily design those solutions? Because people are going to ask for how to do this. And that's actually one of the ways that I got to this point. After all the protesting and all the going against the mayors and doing all the rah, I'm so upset, I realized, yeah, I feel better. I got that out. But what did I really do? I built community around this problem, but how, with this newfound community, can I create systemic change? And we literally did the things that I listed out, researched, created plans, looked at what history did, and started building solutions. We didn't know how it was going to be implemented at the time, but the solutions were being built. After a year and a half of this work, like manna from heaven, literally, mass development creates a program, or does the next round of a program called the Creative Cities Grant, where they were giving out $500,000 to make your city more creative in a sustainable way. we couldn't have designed a better resource for us to access, but we were prepared for the moment because we did all the things that I talked about before. A lot of this, Einstein says that if he's given a problem for an hour, he'll spend 50 minutes thinking about the problem and 10 minutes designing the solution, because it really is in the thought experience where we figure this out. Moving on, we are in an absolute whole new world. And I need us to really understand we are in a whole new world. I'm just gonna give a quick bit about technology. Between RPA, automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, we have to reimagine our relationship with labor. That's a hard truth that we can see play out in history over and over again. As our amazing governor and our state are investing in quantum physics and quantum computing and artificial intelligence, our biggest corporations are also shifting their labor. They can now build one robot to do the same job they were paying someone $40,000 for a year, and it only costs $20,000 and only $1,000 a year for upkeep. There's no reason for human labor to be in certain positions anymore. Do we react to that information like the coal industry? Or do we figure out how to grow with it? That's not for me to decide, that's just for us to contemplate together. And I bring that up because as we're designing creative change, as you're building collaborative networks, as you're trying to see past this administration, the truth of the matter means and stays that the world is different. And we've never done this before. We've never been at this point before. So figuring it out really is gonna take all of our collective energy. And then lastly, again, I have to say, history is our friend. And specifically, right now, we are in 2025, just 1 year away from the 250th anniversary of our country, but you know, because we're Massachusetts, it's also our 250th anniversary. And I've been in many conversations and I've explained, listen, we all love a good musket. We love Lexington and Concord, like Stourbridge Village, that's my spot. I love it there. But how can we use this opportunity to really discuss the stories that were untold and then also accurately commemorate where we are and then design the next 250 years together? That's the task at hand. And as we're deciding that creative economic development is who we are as a state and cultural policy is what we want to adhere to, all of our voices is gonna be so essential to get that done. Okay, I think that's it. I think that was a full 35. I'm sorry, Derek. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you and I hope that was helpful to someone. Do we have time for questions or are we just gonna move on?
Well, people are here. They're not rushing to the door. Does anyone have any questions for Tiffany?
Especially because I didn't speak about anything specific to what I do because I feel like it's all Googleable. But if you do have any questions, I would love to answer them.
We have a question from Mary Jo in the back.
Tiffany, your delivery style is so infectious, and you had us on the edge of our seats. What I'm curious about is when you do the creative cities type work that you've been doing in Springfield, do you find that when you come across folks that are maybe much more traditional, maybe they're elected officials or I don't know what, can you kind of sweep them up in this enthusiasm or how does that work? Because I bet you anything, doing what you do with all the enthusiasm you bring, not everyone initially has that.
Oh, yeah.
And I just wondered, how does that play out when you do creative cities work in Springfield?
I love that question. And if I had to answer it honestly, this has been a work in progress to get where I am. At one point and another, everyone hated me. And I'm not being dramatic. It just is what it is. When you're saying the hard thing out loud and yelling it with a megaphone, you become public enemy #1. So it's so funny. You can look at news articles from 2020 where it's just citizen goes against mayor, da-da-da-da-da-da. And then it was such a big deal that honestly, I was surprised that we won the grant funding when we got the grant funding. But that being said, to answer your question specifically, The naysayers will always be there. When you're talking about systemic change and dismantling systemic oppression, we always jump to the part where people need alleviation. We don't recognize all the time that people are actively living and benefiting from it at the same time we're talking about dismantling it. And that's not a color thing. In Springfield, all of our leadership, except for the mayor, has been black and brown for a very long time. But when you are in proximity to power, and the power is gained in a way that oppresses another person, when you talk about removing it, it shakes everything up. And so I had to deal with things about not being ready to manage such a large amount of monies. Then we started doing things, and I have a little bit of a creative flair, if you can't tell. They started saying, we're a party organization and they're not doing anything real. And we had to just steadfast. We had to hold on to that strategic plan and that vision. And actually, to answer the second part of that question, my mom, on my way up here, she's one of the advisors for the SCCC. She's a 35-year social worker, and she's just a beast, right? She sent me something. She's like, I know you're gonna do your speech, and I know you probably already know what you're gonna say, but please find some way to share this. And so I'm gonna take this opportunity. And she said, to do this work in the face of all the crises we have to do it in, we have to come in solidarity. And she loves a good acronym. So COME stands for coordinate, organize, mobilize, and execute. And then she gives us a second one called RAVE, which says recognize who you are individually and as a collective group, affirm each other, value the gifts, talents, and strengths within each other and our respective communities and our relationships, execute from conceptualizing to design to planning to action of system thinking, holistic approach, data-driven, stakeholder-vetted, trauma-informed policies and practices. And lastly, she said, we will experience discomfort, no more sanitizing, all agendas on the table, and please have emotional intelligence. And so she has advised me to do this in all the work I do. So even in the face of all these issues and people saying no, it gets to a point where just don't believe me, just watch, literally.
Thank you. We have another question back here.
Yay.
Hey, Tiffany.
Hi, Pedro.
Thanks for blowing us away today.
Oh, thank you.
So, one of the things that we always talk about when we think about partnership building across the Commonwealth, there's this, we're right near Worcester, so anything west of Worcester, folks that are working west of Worcester are always like, it's hard for resources to get west, right? So, being from Springfield and doing work out there, one of the things that I want to just give it up to you on really is building the network of artists, creatives, not just in Springfield, but really west of Worcester, right? And inviting even folks kind of on the western side the eastern side of the state to participate in that too, because I think there's a huge power in the collective of networks across the Commonwealth. Can you speak to kind of your efforts in building networks, like the value? Why is it so valuable to build networks of partnerships from Pittsfield all the way to Amherst to Springfield? Why is that important in the work that you do?
That's a great question. It's important because it's honestly everything. Again, going from the smaller, that micro level to the macro level, in the micro level, it's one-to-one partnerships, it's organizations working together, it's people knowing each other. But if you blow that out 30,000 feet to the macro level, it's literally designing communities. And honestly, I have found that that's what everyone is connected to this work through. Somehow, some way, we all want to live in a high value, high quality community with access to the things that we find important and stability amongst the things that we need. We cannot do that without each other. That's just the reality of it. So that's why network is so important, because when I'm trying to convince these foundations, we deserve investment. There's a bunch of creatives here. I'm not talking about myself. I actually need the creatives to be creative so I can point to the people that need the investment. When we talk about needing more resources for Western Mass, the question comes out, why? Well, I needed to know why. I figured out through these networks and through these collaborations. For example, we have a Western Massachusetts Economic Ecosystem Summit that we meet quarterly. Shameless plug, our next one is in Greenfield if you want to check it out, April 4th. And the whole idea in these meetings is to connect with each other and figure out what we actually need and build relationships and heal them. From these meetings, we found out that Asheville has been going through droughts in the winter, and they need more access to water. We understand that the Berkshires on some parts is the wealthiest parts of our state, matching Nantucket and the Cape, and then on other areas, they're just as disproportionately disenfranchised as Springfield. And so learning these details, we can't do it all on a PowerPoint or a spreadsheet. We need to get in there. We need to visit each other. We need to realize that if the Berkshires are doing well, that connects to Hampden and Franklin County. If the east side of the state is doing well, we know that it potentially can mean we can do well as well. So, sorry I use well so much, but the idea that network is essential needs to be embedded into our thoughts, because all of the work that we need to get done is going to involve other people. I always put our network first, and I always try to build it even greater, because I do believe the solutions are going to be found in these intersections between our people across the state. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time. One more question. We have another question? No questions? Nobody.
Yay! Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciated being there, and this is fun.
Keep it going for our keynote speaker, Tiffany Allecia.